All right, let's get going slowly. So welcome to PlusPlus. My name is Marco, and I'll give you a little bit of a history of how we got here before I hand it over to Rebecca. So just in terms of how to participate, please stay muted, but feel free to turn on your camera. Feel free to use the chat, and just I'll be keeping an eye on chat, so you can basically type in anything and ask any questions as we keep going. We also have Technocon on LinkedIn and on X, formerly known as Twitter. So if you want to connect with your peers there as well, so look for us there. But in the meantime, a little bit about our history. So back in the day, about 2017, 2018, I was at Twitter at the time, running Twitter University. I noticed a need for people like us coming together and sharing how we do things. And when I say people like us, it was mostly learning and development that had to do with technology-based companies. So it turns out that things are slightly different. Things are a little bit more fast-paced, and we wanted to learn from one another. So back in 2018, Jenny, then at Salesforce, Rajan from LinkedIn, now Splunk, and myself, we started Technocon, and it was a full day conference. So the first one happened at LinkedIn in 2018. We had some amazing speakers, and then we repeated it in 2019, hosted on Twitter, and then pandemic hit. And so we moved into this format, which is basically every month we do a talk just like this. So as opposed to an annual conference, it's a monthly talk. So we've been doing this for quite some time. So that's a little bit of a history there. So behind the scenes, there's a board that helps govern Technocon so that we can come together and figure out like what are the most relevant talks and so forth. So Andrew was at Shopify at the time. Now he's with Scale Learning. He's actually going to be speaking, I believe, in September. So that's coming up. Chris Schaefer was with Microsoft. He's now with a company called Wiser, and we'll be learning from him also soon. Katie, I used to work with at Twitter. Rajan, like I said, helped start Technocon. And with Marco, so I usually moderate these events. And then Tomomi recently got another opportunity, and so Mark is taking over. So you'll be seeing either Tomomi or Mark reaching out to you on the ongoing basis. So that's a point of contact. Behind the scenes, we also have guidelines, some basic community guidelines. So it basically just says, try to be a good citizen and respect each other's privacy and no solicitation. We're trying to keep this be a community by us, for us, so it's self-governed for the most part. And the topics that we usually seek out have to do with what we roughly call team enablement. So it's an umbrella of different activities that we see technology companies have to undertake when it comes to learning and development. So it could be as simple as onboarding, right? So how do you get new hires clued in into how you do things? It could be knowledge sharing, peer and collaborative learning, mentorship, coaching, technical documentation, and our favorite topic of metrics and insights, how things are going. So those are usually the topics that we seek out and want to present and host at Technocon. So some topics that are coming up soon, we're going to be talking about AI and how it applies to learning and development. Today, we're going to be talking about skills-based framework. We also have some other things coming up as well. If you are not already part of that, please sign up for Slack. Let me see if I can get this link for you. So I'll get that link in the chat fairly soon. But basically, if you go to this link, you can join our Slack channel easily. So again, I'll post it as well. And before we get started, I just wanted to do a little bit of a plug for upcoming events. So we're going to have Kamiko talk about her work on leadership and development at Pinterest. So that's coming up later on in August. And then in September, our board member, Andrew, who we met when he was at Shopify, is going to be talking about AI and how it applies to L&D. So stay tuned for those talks. And with that, I'm going to bring up Rebecca soon. So I met Rebecca a while back. It's been years now when you were at Expedia, I believe. And we shared quite a few notes along the journey. And I know I recently spoke to you about the work you're doing at Procore and how excited you are about that. And so that's kind of how this topic came about. So wanted to give you the stage, Rebecca, and to learn more about your skills-based framework work that you've been doing. So
Thanks so much,
welcome.
Marco.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here. So thankful that you joined us today. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about capability development and skills frameworks specifically today. So skills frameworks came from my background. So I was 12 years in the high school classroom, and then I went corporate, which was quite a shell shock. And because when I got in, I was more technical roles. I was not doing anything in learning and development space or capability development space, but I was challenged once I got into kind of the learning space. I went into specifically around the engineering space. So really building the capabilities of engineers at Expedia. And I was challenged to really identify like ROI. I think that's everyone's idea. Like everyone wants to be able to prove ROI. They're saying, well, how do we prove that this particular training program was valuable? And I said, well, actually, there's really only one way to do that. And so this is what made me like kind of drove me down the path of starting to build out skills frameworks. Now, what I will tell you is I've had plenty of people tell me over the years that, oh my gosh, this is so revolutionary. And I'm like, actually, it's not. What I'm going to introduce to you is what K-12 educators have been doing for many years, or at least the better of the K-12 educators have been doing for many years. So this is not rocket science. This is something, this comes from a lot of understanding, a lot of information, a lot of data that has been captured about learning for many decades. And so all I'm doing is applying that to corporate space, or I should say capability space. It's interesting because when I get into conferences and so forth, I ask people, I'm like, okay, is everybody in the room, do you all have learning in your title? And everybody says yes. And I said, okay, then what is learning? And it's shocking at how few people can actually explain what learning is. Now with AI, you can go to ChatGPT right now and you can type it in and it'll give you a long explanation. But I think it's interesting, just the idea that we have so many learning professionals, whether you call yourself capability development, learning and development, whatever you call yourselves, that we can't really define the term learning. And so that to me is a problem, because if you can't define learning, then how do you measure your programs? Okay, so I'll go back a slide here in just a minute to talk to you a little bit about this, but how do you measure your learning programs? And when I ask that question to folks, they say, well, we have NPS scores and we have surveys and we have the satisfaction and, all of these things. And I said, okay, so you are admitting then that you are not measuring learning. And that is, it's prickly. I mean, people don't necessarily like to admit that, but that's oftentimes the case where we're really not measuring what people are learning. We're measuring who shows up and we're measuring how satisfied they are at the end. So what I'm really trying to do with my programs is understand what learning is and be able to track the progress of people learning. So going back a slide, the taxonomy that I use is Bloom's. There are many different learning taxonomies out there, but the foundational piece to this, and this is Bloom's taxonomy version 1. There's a new version out. I just actually prefer this one. This is the one I learned many years ago. And so Bloom's taxonomy is basically, if you've never heard of it before, Bloom's taxonomy is the way we learn. And so this has been around since the 1950s. Dr. Bloom came up with this, and it's been around for a very long time. And it has lasted. So you will still see K-12 educators learning Bloom's and using Bloom's in the classroom because it is a really valuable tool. But I rarely see people at the corporate level doing this. And so as we think about learning, we have to think about, well, how do we actually learn? So you start at the knowledge level. The knowledge level is where you have someone present something to you, like I'm presenting today, where you recall information, you observe things, you list things out, very bottom level, really not learning, but it's like the foundation of learning. And then you get to the comprehension level where you can actually discuss things about it, you can ask questions, but more than that, you can kind of You know how when in school you were asked to put something in your own words? So there was a sentence or a paragraph, and you were supposed to put it in your own words. That's the comprehension level. And then application is easier for us to understand. That's where you start to apply what you've just learned, oftentimes being given direct instructions, so forth. And then analysis, synthesis, and evaluation is where I really think the learning starts to kick in. It's when you can tear things apart, all of these bits and pieces of all this information, tear them apart, examine them, right? And then synthesis is putting them back together in a way that they did not come to you in the first place. So synthesizing is taking these bits and pieces and putting them back together in a different way. And then, of course, evaluation is there at the top where you can actually debate things, you can judge things because you have so much more information. So this is the foundation of what I believe to be very important, specifically for engineers and actually all learning programs. So if we have a base level of knowledge, which means we have to have a good knowledge base. So knowledge management is where that really kind of fits in down there, all the way up to evaluation. Now, we don't need all of our employees all the way up at the evaluation level, right? We can just get them to the application level, and that's just fine. But if we want people thinking about the new content that they're learning, we've got to get them above application. Now, I will tell you that research has shown us that in most learning and development programs, the maximum level we usually get is application level. And that also goes for the regular schools as well. So moving forward, I just wanted to share with you some of the foundation of this. All right, so I've put together this slide to kind of like distinguish between the traditional L&D model versus capability development. Now, this is not to say that all L&D programs are this way on the left. It's just generally speaking, this is what they do. And then what I do is pretty different. And so that is why my title is capability development. So you can take a look at this on your own. I think the biggest thing here is that usually the traditional L&D is more focused on the transfer of information rather than on the learning process. And the reason I say that is because there's usually no measurement of learning in those traditional L&D programs, as in this person actually upskilled this many levels on this skill. And so that's what we do in capability development. So it's very, very different. So I just wanted to share this. This slide is controversial, I understand, but I always like to kind of throw things in there to get people talking. All right, I'll give you a second to look at all of that. And also if there are any questions, comments so far, because I'm about to get into the good stuff here. So, all right, we'll go ahead and move on then. And so capability development, we have the skills frameworks at the very bottom. That is our foundation. And then we have a skills evaluation. I love anonymous self-evaluations. I think they're incredibly valuable. So we do that anonymous self-evaluation piece. And then because from the skills evaluations, we're finding the gaps in skills, we can then curate learning courses. And so this is really where there's a difference, because now if I, internally we can build courses, sure. But if I have to go outside of Procore to get some materials or some kind of training materials or courses, I need to know exactly what my people need to do, be able to do at the end of that course so that I can communicate that to the vendor and then they can actually give us what we need. So this is happening right now with a vendor. I just got out of a call where when they came to us, they said, we would like to do this training for you. And I said, okay, under two circumstances, you use our learning platform and you use our skills frameworks. And they were like, okay, can we see those? And I said, sure. So they take a look at it and they're like, yeah, we can modify our materials for that. And so they are directly teaching to our skills framework, which is fantastic. That's exactly what we need, because now we can track progress in filling those gaps, because we know where people are at the very beginning before the course starts, and then the instructors validate proficiency level on those skills at the end of the courses. And then, of course, there's professional growth at the top. So just a quick overview of kind of how we think about this. So this is kind of I just tried to put together kind of a workflow for you so that you could kind of see how this works. So we have employees doing anonymous self-evaluations. The capabilities then are identified. And then we can decide and prioritize the types of courses that we send out there based upon the skills gaps and also the need within the business. And then for us, the capability development team at the top, this is where we can either develop or acquire course content. We can offer those courses, and then we have that skill validation at the end by the instructor. So the employee workflow, so after they know where their highest capabilities are and where their gaps are, they can start looking at this. They can either have a conversation with their manager or whatever. They can go out and start finding courses, because our skills frameworks are so specific. They can really hone in on exactly just those items that they really want to learn. They don't have to take an entire course. They can just take bits and pieces, or like extract learning, like little pieces of learning. The course and complete it. And of course, then we hope that there's some kind of validation on the skill. But if it's an external source, we can't get that information. But anyway, this just kind of gives you a high level view of how we think about skills frameworks. So are there any questions?
And feel free to also type them in the chat. I see Macy had a question. Are you also administering anonymous evaluations from people managing direct reports? How does that work?
Good question. So not currently, primarily because we find that managers often don't really understand the deeper skills levels of their employees. And so what I want to do eventually is I want to be able to do kind of that 360-degree view, right? So I would like for an engineer to be able to say, I would like the following 2 or 3 people to evaluate me on the following skills. That's where we're going with this. We're just not quite there yet, because quite frankly, I do not have a system that has been built that will house our skills framework. So it's really difficult to do that 360 view without some technology behind it. So great question. Thanks, Macy. All right. Then some challenges that we faced with this. Many of our engineers do not believe the self-evaluations are anonymous. I have had many people not trust that I don't ever see their names. Now, I can show them all the screenshots that I have. I literally do not, and honestly, I don't care. My goal is not to isolate and to figure out who is bad at something. That's a manager's job. That's not my job. My job is about learning. And so they don't believe it. So we've mitigated, which I think this is kind of funny. I hope you find the humor in this as well. We mitigated this by every time a person registers for a course, our courses are directly aligned to our skills frameworks. And so therefore we list out the skill or skills, and we have them do like a self-evaluation during the registration process, but then their name is attached to it, which I think is kind of funny, because we gave them the option of doing anonymous. And anyway, it's kind of funny, but this is not anonymous, but they've accepted it and they really enjoy it. It's really kind of interesting. And I'll show you some metrics around what we have seen with this one particular course that we're just launching right now, or that we're in the middle of. And then also, because of this challenge of people not trusting that it's anonymous, we don't get that priority list that we wanted, right? So we don't understand like the priorities of where the skills gaps are so much. So that's the challenge for us as well. So we're trying to figure that one out. And so it's more conversation that I have with leaders and so forth, but also just feedback that I get from engineers as well. I wanted to show you a sample of a skills framework. So these are just 2 skills, but this is how detailed we get. So we have a skill category for organizational purposes. This is a part of this larger software engineering skills framework. By the way, for software engineers, we have 75 skills. There's a lot of them. And so you have to kind of go through, I have some, we've been doing some ways of getting teams the information that they actually need, because not every software engineer needs to do every single skill. So anyway, there's some interesting stuff there, but we break our skills down into 4 levels, what it looks like to be beginner, approaching, proficient, and advanced. What I love about this, and by the way, this is just a rubric. This is just what teachers have been using for decades in classes to evaluate students. But here, what we can do is people can evaluate themselves and go, you know what, I think I'm just at the approaching level on this first skill. And that's great, because then if we get that data, we can prioritize a course in this, we can teach the proficient level. What I also love about skills frameworks is that those bullet points with a slight modification in verbs can turn immediately into learning outcomes for a course, right? So then If I'm teaching a course to the proficient level, every person who comes into the course can actually see that and understand it and go, yep, that's the course for me. So every time we publish a course, we tell the folks who in the registration process, we tell them the course title, who's teaching it, what skill or skills are being covered in the course, and what to what level of the skill that course is being taught. And then therefore they can select the appropriate courses for what they need. Okay, so I just threw a bunch of stuff at you. So please ask questions or comments or whatever as I go, or we can just wait until the end to take up questions and comments. But just a super easy way. Sure, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I had a super quick question. Beginner, approaching, proficient, and advanced. Is this a standard sort of way to break it down, the four categories?
Yeah, it's so I actually like numbers better. The reason that I like to use numbers, I like to have beginning be 1 and advanced be 4, because a lot of people you'll find stick right in between. They're not quite, say, a 2, but they're more than a 1. I like the 1.5 kind of idea, but 1 is, the numbers are seen as so negative, and I don't see it as negative. It's just a place to be. So that's why I've changed the names, and it's a pretty standard way of doing rubrics. So yeah.
Got it. Cool. I think Brian, sorry.
Yeah, Bayan. Yeah. Hi, Bayan.
Hi, Rebecca. Good to see you. Hi, everyone. Just FYI, I used to work with Rebecca in Expedia Group, so it's really lovely to see you here. I have a quick question because we have attempted to do something similar, and it always becomes like an isolated development thing that is not very well tied into performance review and like promotions and so on. So how would you describe the best way to bring this as like evidence to back up a person who's trying to go from beginning to approaching to proficient and then build the career off of that?
Yeah. Okay. So fantastic question. What I love to do is when a career map or a leveling guide, whatever it is that is created for engineers, whenever those are created, I love to be a part of that process. And right now at Procore, I am. This is really kind of cool, because what happens is when you have a career map, there are competencies, right? There are competencies usually listed that people should have. But those competencies are too big. So if you tell a person, you need to improve in communications, like, what does that even mean? You don't really know. And so if the competency is communication and all the manager says is you need to improve your communication, the person has no idea where to go. So what I love to do is competency. I love to take that and put that as a skill category and then build out the skills that are necessary for that competency, if that makes sense. And so then it's directly tied to their, like, the career map or the leveling guide that they're looking at to get promotion. Now, what I will tell you too, and I will drop this in once I stop sharing my screen, there is a video by Eduardo Brusino that is out on YouTube that talks about the difference between the performance zone and the learning zone. And it's a very critical video to understand, because he uses like sports, for example, as a way to explain this. We've, the Olympics, right? An Olympic athlete, they do this thing. So the competency is they're running the 100 meter, right? That's the competency. But then there's a ton of bits and pieces of skills that they need to develop, and even sub skills that they need to develop in order to be an effective runner. Same thing with tennis. It's every sport. There's playing piano. It's the same thing. You go back to practicing the scales, right? You have to break things down in order to improve. But in the performance zone, we actually don't learn anything. So if we're always performing and always trying to just do our best and not make mistakes, we're not learning, because we learn when we make mistakes. So we have to give people the opportunity to learn in the learning zone where they can make mistakes, right? So then their skills actually build, right? So that was a really long answer and probably too fast, but does that help? And I'll put the video in there. I'll find it real quick, and I'll put the video in the chat so that you can watch it. It's 11 minutes. It's worth your time.
Yeah, this absolutely makes so much sense, because oftentimes I feel like that's where the gap really is, because people want to invest in their development, but they don't
Yes.
see that same investment being given back by their manager or leadership or opportunities in general, like to actually put those skills to the performance zone, I would say.
Exactly.
But thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet.
There was also a question,
Mhm.
sorry, from Macy, on how do you prioritize which courses, I guess, and content to create and own, and do you partner with other stakeholders? Because it seems like, you know, creating courses and for each of the skills and maintaining that can be a lot of work. Yeah.
It is a lot of work. So I do partner with the business on those. So let's talk about priorities first. So the first thing is, I am not in L&D. I am actually in the product and tech organization. And thank you for the video. There it is. Thanks so much. So I am in the product and tech organization, which means that I'm very close to engineering, product, and design. And so I sit in meetings. We have ops reviews. I sit in those meetings and I understand I've been in technology for a long time. And so I can sit in and understand what's going on. And when I see something happening, let's say that there's an incident or something, and I go and I figure out, okay, well, what caused that incident? Do we need any assistance there? I usually find themes there. So having embedded, like I'll call them learning teams inside of the business, this is how I figure out priorities. And then I will list my priorities out that I feel that I have heard, and then I'll take those to the leadership team and just verify that those are the topics. And then when we go to build out courses, I'm always trying to find like subject matter experts within the organization to build out those courses. A side note, I have an instructor academy. I call it the How People Learn Instructor Academy, because it's not just about instructors. Managers can definitely use it. Anybody who works with anyone else is really benefited by this course. Teaches people learning theory and all of that so that they become a really effective instructor for us. So I started in January. I started and ran my first cohort for the Instructor Academy, and we base everything on Bloom's taxonomy. They learn all about the skills frameworks and how to take these bullet points and make them into learning outcomes. And we have had a tremendous number of courses already like offered within the company. So to me, it's really about the team, like the team that wants to teach something. It's how they want to prioritize that particular topic. So I go at it a little bit different way. If a particular engineering team is like dealing with too many like support tickets and they need to be building things instead, they're not a support team, but they've turned into a support team. That's a really good way of getting in with that team, having them teach a course so that the number of their support tickets drops because they're educating people. So it really has to do with being very involved in the business itself. I hope that answers the question, Macy. Yeah, you bet.
Thank you.
I'm going to throw this up here. Are there any other questions? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Just a few things here. I love the skills frameworks for so many reasons. From my perspective, I know exactly, like if I don't have somebody internal to teach a course, I can go to a vendor and say, here's our skills framework. Can you teach this course? And they look at me like, whoa, never seen anything like that. Nobody ever gives us this kind of detail. So there's a company that I'm working with right now that took exactly our skills framework, and they've created 3 courses for us. One at the beginner level, because we have so many pre-beginners. One at the proficient level, because we have a lot of people at the approaching level. And then they're also going to be teaching an advanced course, and we're going to be rolling that out between now and of October using exactly the skills framework. So everyone knows what they're getting when they come in, and they're being evaluated against that same skill framework at the end of the course. So we can tell people, yep, you are now a beginner on this particular skill. Congratulations. You are now approaching or proficient at this skill. So we can give them little certificates at the end and so forth, and we can keep track of the progress. And then we can actually map ROI, because now we know that we have actually upskilled people because of evidence. And by the way, all of the courses we offer are evidence-based, which means that people don't just sit and listen. They actually have to do projects to show us that they can do something. So it's a very engaging program, and it's not in person. This is all done virtually. Oh, I can read this one off actually. So Jennifer, thanks for the question. So reflection frameworks. I love reflection, right? I don't necessarily have a framework for those reflections, but in this particular case, these courses, because they're performance-based, are directly dealing with the work that they do. So that way we can actually measure not just what they learned, but also how they're performing. So it really matters if you have good engineering teams with the internal systems that you have to build out those metrics for you. It's tedious, but like for example, we're teaching a course right now on GitHub Copilot. GitHub Copilot does not give us the metrics that I'm looking for that match up to our skills framework. But guess what? I have an hour-long meeting with them tomorrow where we're going through the details because I want GitHub Copilot to tell me more, right? So it is we have to work, we have to push these systems to give us the data that we need. But at least I'm getting skills performance data out, right? So I'm getting that skills piece. At least I'm getting that. So at the very, very least, at least I can show an upskill. But in technical speak, it's really difficult to have those systems that actually give you that measurement. So it's something that I'm constantly working on with people. Yeah. So here's some of the metrics. So this right here is a pot of gold to an instructor. This is pre-course data. So off of the registration, people, and by the way, a lot of people will not even be at the beginner level. So we ask them if they consider themselves to be pre-beginner, right? So here we get this data on every skill covered in the course. Gold mine. Because guess what? A few things. Number one, if we're teaching to the beginner level, it's going to be really interesting to see how many those beginners stay beginners. They may think about analysis, synthesis, evaluation on blooms. They may get enough information in this course to suddenly be advanced. I don't know. We haven't seen the data yet, right? But at least those pre-beginners, we can get to the beginner level. And that's what we're waiting on now. We have 2 more weeks of this particular course that I'm sharing this data with you about, and then we'll see where we are. So pretty cool stuff. I love this kind of data because guess what? That advanced person there on the intelligent code generation, I want to use that student. And I want to engage that student and have them give us that, like, help us in like describing how they got there and what they do differently and all of that. You use those advanced learners and even proficient learners to say, hey, what do you think about this? It's also going to be interesting to see where these folks actually land at the end of the course. Because what if a person says that they're proficient, but they barely are beginner? That's also really interesting information, right? So those pieces of data are really important to us. And this is all that learning stuff. Okay, so now I'm gonna stop here because I want to share with you one more tidbit about what we're doing beyond learning. So are there any other questions about this data? And by the way, we will be taking these spreadsheets and the instructors are going to be giving us, like, where people are based upon what people have actually turned in during the courses. So this way, at the very end, we have a validated skill level by the instructor. So the initial question was self-evaluation. The last is really about that instructor evaluation against the skills frameworks as to where people are based upon what they've turned in. Okay, so now my dream is coming true for the first time. My dream has always been that the skills framework should be a part of the hiring process. Because if you are holding your employees to a standard and all you're doing is the basic interview questions, like behavioral style interview questions and looking at people's resumes, you don't actually know what they can do. So now we have introduced at Procore, I am so excited about this. We're launching this across the entire P&T organization. It's just taking me a little bit of time to get there, but now we are doing skills-based hiring. We have just started. So I do not have any data on how this has gone yet. We just started a couple. In fact, we launched August 1st. We've kind of been doing some pilots here and there. Okay, so here's the deal. Managers identify the top skills and the level of the skill that they need for a role. They then communicate that to the recruiter. Imagine that. Now the recruiter has like hard like data to go after those resumes. Okay, the recruiter can now narrow down the pool. There are so many engineers out there looking for jobs right now. It makes it so, it just helps so much when you get 700, 1,500 applications to be able to narrow down. Like, I hope people have really great resumes because you can narrow down based upon these skills. Managers then interview using a question bank that gives them the questions for each skill. So after they've identified those skills, I've given them a question bank of questions that are skills based. So the manager interview becomes very, very skills based. Now, like in our design team, they do a portfolio, right? So the designers come in, these candidates come in with portfolios. And so now what we can do is we can assess those portfolios against the exact same skills framework. And thank you, Bayan, for saying that. Yes, we're trying to overcome the biases. We are trying to get the subjectivity out of the hiring process as much as we can, right? And again, that skills framework is the scorecard. So this is an example of the question bank that I created. I took this particular skill with a description of the skill. Folks, I'm using AI every day in my job, okay? This is not me writing these things out. This is me just, I'm fairly good at prompt engineering. I can figure out the prompt that AI needs to be able to give me what I'm looking for. So that's what I've done here. And look at the top there. If you don't like these questions, here's how I did it. This is how I generated questions. So I'm giving everybody here's my prompt. This is how I do it. And so then what they do, let me go back a couple of spots here. I'm going to go back to this. So let's say that this person, this manager, or whoever's asking the questions, needs a person, site reliability on the design, deploy, and manage apps in the cloud environments. They need this person to be proficient. They take these bullet points, okay? They take those bullet points and put in the prompt, create a series of questions that can be asked of a software engineering interview that can help a manager determine that a candidate meets the minimum requirements for the following items. Paste. And it creates the questions for you. Okay. So this is just my methodology. Okay. This has always been my dream though after skills, because I know that there's so much more that we can do besides just in the learning space. And that is it, folks. That is all I have for you. So just wanted to throw this at you. It is something pretty different. Most people have never heard of doing anything like this before. Again, it's not rocket science. It's not me. It's just my background in education is all this is. So it is not, it's funny because when I was interviewing teachers for the open role that I have or had, I showed them the scorecards, what we call the scorecards, which is the rubrics. And they just started laughing. They're like, really? This is that revolutionary? I'm like, yeah, this is really funny. So anyway, so that's all I have. Is there anything, comments or questions?
I know. Thank you, Rebecca. I know we had a few questions on the chat. Anybody else? Anything else that comes up? I'm curious in terms of, I guess I'll ask a question. In terms of all the skills that you have cataloged, like what does that look like? I know you showed us one example for SRE, site reliability engineering. How many are we talking about? Dozens, hundreds? Like what's the scale of these things?
So engineering right now is at 75 skills. So product management, I just finished. And I broke it down into sub skills because product management has not just technical skills, but also the non-technical or essential skills. The essential skills, I really needed to break down into sub skills, and I had over 400 lines on my spreadsheet. It's a lot. So with the product management group, what I did was I showed, I grabbed their competencies from their career maps, and I broke those down into skills using AI, folks. Like, I'm not doing this on my own. Broke those down into skills, and I was like, ooh, those are too big. I can't measure those. And so I started breaking them down even further. And so I broke them down into sub skills. So now when a person goes to the career map, there's a direct link from that competency over to the skills framework, the appropriate one. And so it's a lot. But with AI, like these skills frameworks used to take me 10, 12 months to produce, because I had to get a bunch of, subject matter experts involved, and they had to come up with a list of skills. And now we don't have to do that. AI is powerful in that way. So a design skills framework, I think we're at 25 skills right now. So it's very varied across the different disciplines. It just really depends upon how many soft skills we are identifying, or soft, I call them essential skills.
Got it. And when I did something similar back in the day, I found the biggest challenge was agreeing on what those skills are, right? Like it's
yes.
If you have the right person, the one authoritative source, then it's easy. But if you ask 2-3 senior people and you get 5-6 different answers, like how do you actually cut the knot and decide what to go with?
Yeah.
What is your experience?
Yeah. So what I've done because of AI, what I do is well, first of all, I figure out what the skills are myself. So I prompt AI to give me the list, because then it's neutral. No one gave me the list, right? It was just generated neutrally. Then I identify the subject matter experts for those different areas. So like site reliability, I go to my SRE population, right? I go to them and say, who can help me validate these skills? All I'm asking you to do is validate them. I don't need you to write them, but also tell me if there's something missing. What's interesting is because it's generated initially by AI, I haven't had anybody fighting over it. Like, it's really interesting. I think sometimes personalities get in the way of making progress. And so if you have someone creating the list, it's different than AI generating it. It's so interesting. It's just psychology. So I have just found that AI generation is working. I'm not having any fights. Now we'll see. Product management's going to be interesting. We'll see if there are any arguments over some of the stuff in there. But and I see, Macy, you do have a question. How do you work with the business to create and align on the levels and descriptions? Yeah, so that's what I do, right? I just find the people who are the subject matter experts. I ask leaders. I sit in a lot of engineering meetings, right, and product meetings. So I know the characters. I know I oftentimes look up their titles to make sure, and then I'll just reach out to them individually and say, hey, I just have a skill or two that I'd like for you to look at. Like, for software engineers, I had some security engineering skills that needed to go in there, right? Well, I went to the security team for that, not software engineers. I went to the security team and said, hey, I have these 3 skills. Do you think this is sufficient for, and then for engineers, and can you look at the levels and just make sure that we're good? And they just make slight tweaks. That's all they do. Most of our skills are not Procore specific. They're very general, which is what I want too, because I want people to have those skills that they need for other jobs too, if they need to leave the company. So
very cool.
Any other questions or comments? Welcome. They are welcome.
As a reminder, we did report this, and we're going to publish it to YouTube, and we're also going to make the summary of the talk and make it available to all of you. So just so you know. Awesome. And Rebecca tends to also be around in the Slack channel. So I posted that link earlier. So if you want to join Slack Excellent. And ask questions, I would imagine that would work. Great. Cool. Well, with that, thank you all. Thank you, Rebecca. Great to see everyone. Just as a quick reminder, we do this about once a month. So we'll have a couple of upcoming talks. So here from Pinterest later on this month on learning and development, developing leadership development programs for different levels of leaders. So that's going to be interesting. And then Andrew, who used to be at Shopify, is now doing some interesting work in AI with respect to L&D. So stay tuned for that in September. So with that, Rebecca, thank you once again.
Thank you so
and,
much.
I'll see you all online.
Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
No, it was great, Marco.
Thank you. All right.
Yeah. See you in a
ya.
bit. Bye.